In this video, I'm going to run through the steps that I followed to create this animation of a route that I cycled. And then I downloaded my Strava data, imported it into QGIS, and then created this animation. So let's switch to QGIS. And on screen, the only layer I'm showing right now is my route data. It's the data I downloaded from Strava as a GPX file, and when you do this you'll probably find the actual route is in a layer which says tracks at the end of it. So I've got my GPX track layer on screen. I've got some other layers on there, but you'll see more about them in a minute or two. So first things first, in order to create the animation, I should say there's a number of different ways you can do this, but this is my preferred method. The first thing I will do is I'll right click on the layer. I'll export it. So I'm going to save the layer in a different format with a different coordinate reference system. So I'm going to save it, I'll just save it as a shapefile. I'll click the browse button and I'll call it Strava route. And then I'm going to click on save. The thing I'll do here is I'm going to change the CRS. It's at WGS84 EPSG4326 at the moment. I'm going to change that to this one called Pseudo Mercator. I'm doing that because this is a coordinate reference system that uses meters, and that's going to be helpful for us. So I'll click OK, and the new layer is in the map, so I can remove the old one. Okay, so I've got a Strava route. You don't need to remove the old one, but I like to keep things tidy when I'm doing it and not have extra layers that I don't need. So now, in order to create an animation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this line. So I've already opened the processing toolbox. So I'll type in split. And here, the one I want to use is split lines by maximum length. Now I know this route I cycled was about 10 miles. So depending on how smooth or how chunky you want your animation to be, you can decide on the maximum length of the lines. If I double click this, I need to set the input layer to the route, so it's my Strava route. Maximum line length, for me, I'm just going to do 100 meters as the maximum line length. That'll create lots of sections to this line, but that's fine. If I didn't export this to a new layer with that new CRS, that new coordinate reference system, it could say degrees here, and that would complicate things. So I did that correctly, so everything's fine. The split file, well, I want to create a layer I save, not a temporary layer. So I'll click on the browse button. I'll save it to file. Let's just save it as a shapefile again. And I'll call this Strava route. And I'm going to call it 100M. So that I remember it's got a maximum section length of 100 meters. I'll hit save and I'll hit run and close. So now we have our route that's split into 100 meter sections. I'm going to remove my earlier one, and there we have a 100 meter section route. If I open the attribute table for this, we can see there's loads of different sections. So that's what we want to. We want lots of different ones. It doesn't matter that the data is all null and column 1 says the same thing in each one. All we're doing here is creating sections. So now what I want to do is I want to add in some background mapping and style. So I went to my web menu and I've already got the Quick Map Services plugin installed. So I added a Bing satellite layer, which I'll turn on. And if I double click it, all I did here was I moved the brightness down to -30. I just wanted it to be a bit darker to make the line easier to see. So I'll click OK on that. I also added a terrain layer. I added one for Great Britain, and you can find a link to that in the video description. You can also get data for pretty much the whole world via NASA's SRTM dataset, and that is linked in the description too. So I'll turn this on, and you can see it just gives it a little bit of depth. And what I did to this layer, if I double click it, I made sure the blend mode was multiply. I exaggerated the Z factor or the Z factor. That just makes the elevation stand out more. And I've taken the brightness to 91. And what I've done is I've colorized it, and I've used the Strava color. So I used the color picker here to pick the color from the Strava website. So it's got a little bit of an orange Strava glow to the hills. If I untick this and then click apply, you'll see what happens. If I tick it again and click apply, it's just a subtle orange glow to the hills, a nod to the data source. So that's what I've got there. And note that the terrain layer is on top of the satellite layer. Okay, so that's some backdrop mapping. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to style the data for our atlas, because we're going to use QGIS Atlas to create something that's animated. And this layer that I've got here, I already did the preparation, and I'll show you what it looks like. If I go to symbology, we have a couple of rules on two different symbols, and these relate to the atlas feature ID. We haven't set up the atlas yet, but we will do that soon. So I'll double click on these to see what's happening. The first one is just a simple line, color white, thickness 0.6, and there's a rule here, but we'll come back to that. The other one, I'll double click it, and instead of displaying the line as a line, so it would usually be simple line here, I'm using a marker line so that the line displays as a point, but only on the first vertex. And what that means is that there will be a dot at the start of the line in my animation. And the size is 3, I've got a stroke, so the outline color of the line is white, the stroke width is 0.6, and the fill color, that's the Strava color that I picked off the website. Okay, so a couple of things there. And this one here, the rule on this is ID equals atlas feature ID. We'll come back to that. But for now, we're going to switch to the print layout, which I've already set up. So if I go to project and layouts, you can see there's a Strava route layout I already set up, and I'll explain that too. So what I've got is a page here with an aspect ratio of 16:9. The reason I did that was I wanted it to fill the whole screen. So if I right click on the page and go to page properties, on the right hand side you can see I've made my page width 320 millimeters wide and 180 millimeters high. So that's going to give you a 16:9 aspect ratio, and the video will fill the screen when I create it. I've also added a picture box here that says Strava in it, and what I did was I added that, and in the SVG image section, if I scroll down, let me just expand this section here. If I scroll down, you can see I added a Strava logo SVG that I got off the internet, and in the bottom right I added a QGIS white SVG logo. So it's up to you, you can add them if you like. And that's the basic page setup. Now what I did in this section was I created an atlas, and in QGIS you can use the atlas to create individual frames. So I went to the atlas tab, and if you don't see the atlas tab, you can go to view and then panels and make sure atlas is ticked. So in the atlas tab I have clicked generate an atlas, and we needed to specify a coverage layer. So the coverage layer at the moment is the one I already created, but what we're going to do is we're going to change it to the new Strava route that I just saved as a shapefile. Okay. And the last thing we need to do is we need to click the Atlas button to turn the Atlas on. So this is the preview Atlas button will turn the Atlas on, and then probably everything will disappear, or in this case actually just stay as it is. So let's switch back to the main map canvas. And now what I'm going to do is I'll go through the steps to create the style that I already used in the layer that I prepared previously for the animation. So I'll double click the Strava route layer, And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Simple Line, and I'm going to change that to rule based. And I will double click where it says no filter. And the rule here is going to be $ID equals Atlas Feature ID. But we're also going to add in a less than symbol, because what we want to happen here is we want the Atlas feature to show the current location of the line, but we also want to create a kind of trail behind it so that we see the line grow as I go through the cycle route. It's really difficult to get an understanding of this at this stage, so let's just click OK and you'll see what happens. The line itself, we're going to make 0.6 width, and color is going to be just basic white. And I'll click OK. So we've got that, that's fine. I'm going to right click this and copy it, and then right click and paste. So this other one I've just created, I'll double click the rule. The rule here for the second one is just going to be ID equals Atlas Feature ID, but it's not going to be a simple line. So I'll click Simple Line, and the symbol layer type here is going to be marker line. So I'm using a point instead of a line here. And if I click on Simple Marker, we can see the fill color is a red, so we'll change that to one I already picked from the Strava website. The outline color is going to be white. It's going to be 0.6 width for the stroke, and the fill, the size of the dot is going to be 3. If I go back to marker line, the last thing I'm going to do is I don't want a dot everywhere, I just want a dot on the first vertex. Again, it's difficult to understand sometimes what this does, but this is just placing a dot at the start of the route as it's been animated. So let me click OK. And what we've done is we've set up a rule for each type of symbol, and we've also styled them. So if I click OK, we can see there's now a dot on screen, so that's a good sign. Let's switch back to the print layout. Now nothing may seem to have happened, so that's not a problem, we just hit the refresh button. It'll take a moment. Now, if I start clicking the forward next feature button, and let me just skip forward to maybe number 30, we can see what happens as I keep going through. The line continues to grow. So this animation effect happens because we've got those two rules on. The rule for the white line was ID is less than or equal to Atlas Feature ID. So because we put a less than in, we get that trailing line. And for the dot, the rule we had was ID equals Atlas Feature ID. So it only shows the current Atlas feature as the dot. If I expand the Atlas section, you can see some other things I've done. The page name, which is a number at the top, that's just a number. If I go further along, we can see more of the line. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, we can see there's 283 separate sections to this line. Now with the Atlas in QGIS, when you export it, it exports one page for every single Atlas frame. In this case, that would give us 283 separate features. What I usually do when I'm turning this into an animation is I do one more thing. I want to make sure that my Atlas individual features or individual image files have got sequential names that are numeric. So in the output section, I'll hit the expression button, and I use this little thing called LPAD. So what that's going to do is it's going to provide file names that are 4 numbers long, padded with zeros. And that's where the Atlas feature number comes in. That's the number that appears in the file name. It's going to be 4 digits wide, and it's going to be padded with zeros. So let me cancel that. If I go back to the start here and click on the output, we'll see the preview 0001. So you could pad that with anything. If I padded that with ones, it would say 1111. But I'm padding it with zeros. If I wanted it to be 5 digits wide, I could do that. So the LPAD Atlas feature, comma, number, comma, 0 is pretty useful. So I'll click on OK, and that's all set up fine. And I'll probably just go back to my map, my main map view, and I'll save the project again, save as, hit save, and then I'll go back to the print layout, make sure everything looks okay, and then what I will do is I'll go to Atlas, export Atlas as images, and I will just put it in a new folder called Atlas Test 4. So all we're doing here is we're specifying a save location. I'll hit select folder, and then I can specify the resolution. Now when I'm doing this, for something that I'm going to create as a video, I will just change the size to 1920. And because I've already set up the page with the correct aspect ratio, the page height automatically goes to 1080. So that's all set up. What I will do is I'll hit the save button. My computer is quite quick. It could take a few hours on your computer. It depends how many frames you've got. It does require a bit of patience. So I'll hit the save button and I'll let them export, and then we'll continue the video once that's done. Okay, so my files have exported and they are in the folder that I created for them. Let me just pull them into screen. And we can see here we've got all the individual frames, and these are what I can use to make an animation. Now there's a number of different ways we can create animations, but we don't do that within QGIS itself. We create the frames there and then we patch them together with another tool. I use FFMPEG for this, but there are a number of different options. One option is you can use an online tool like EasyGIF, and you can actually create a GIF from up to 2,000 files. Now it might take a while online. Under the hood of these tools uses similar things to what I actually use to create my animations. So if you want to make a simple GIF, you can try that. It's probably easier if you have smaller file sizes, but this is one way to do it. You can also use something like Photoshop or other Adobe tools, but I'm going to use FFmpeg because it's free, open source, and extremely powerful. So we'll look at that in a second. I do have a full blog post on making map animations with FFmpeg, but you can see that another time. The key thing here is if you want to follow along now, you just need to make sure that you've got FFmpeg installed, and there are installation instructions here. It's super fast on Linux and Mac, and it's still quick on Windows to get it installed. It just takes a little bit of attention to detail. So if you want to carry on from this point, just make sure you've got FFmpeg installed, and I'll get it on my screen now and we'll make an animation. The key thing we'll be using is a little bit of text, a little command further down the page, which creates a video file, an MP4 file, from a set of images. I already have FFmpeg installed, so I've opened my command prompt in Windows, and the first thing I need to do is browse to the location where my individual frames are stored. So here I can just type in G : and hit enter, and that will take me to my G drive. Now I'm going to just right click on the address of the folder where I have my files and click copy address as text. And then if I get the command prompt back up, I'll type in CD space and then I'll paste that address. So now we're in the folder where all the images are located. And now it's a case of entering a command. I'm going to paste this one in. So the way FFmpeg works is we write FFmpeg And then there's a -R, so that's the input frame rate. So we're going to animate this at 10 frames a second first of all to see what it looks like. The input set of files, it says present04d.png. That just means we're telling FFmpeg that there's a series of files and they're PNG files and they've got 4 digits and they're padded with zeros. There's some other stuff, you know, kind of codec information, the size of the video 1920 times 1080. You could scale that however you like, but that matches the actual image dimensions. The output frame rate is going to be 30. We've got some other video encoding stuff here. And the last thing is my output file will be called Strava-10 FPS because it's 10 frames per second. And then what will happen is when I hit enter, it will put this together and then it will add the video file to the folder. So I'll hit enter and you can see what happens. It won't take long with something with just a few hundred frames. So it's done now and we see a video. So what I usually do at this stage is I'll double click to open the video and we can see at 10 frames per second, it's not bad. It's not bad. I might make it go a little bit faster, so we'll try it again with 15 frames per second. But you can see the frames have been patched together now and we have a really nifty little Strava animation just using QGIS to generate the frames and a very simple command in FFmpeg to create the video file. So I'll close this one and I'll go back to my command prompt, and if I press the up arrow, that just brings up the previous command. So I'm going to scroll to the left or move my cursor to the left and change the 10 to 15. So we're going to have a frame rate of 15. So all I'll do here is I'll go back to the file name for the output file and change that to 15 frames per second. So this video will be the same as before, but instead of 10 frames per second, we've got 15 frames per second. And I'll hit enter. Again, it'll be pretty quick to create this. If your computer is a bit slower, don't worry about it. It just depends on the spec of your machine. So I'll double click this. And I think that for me, I just like that a little bit better. The line's moving a bit faster and the animation is just a bit zippier. So it just depends. You can experiment with this, and then once you've got what you're looking for, that's fine. You can experiment all day long with frame rates, but I think for me 15 frames per second works pretty well. Okay, so let me stop this and I'll go back to QGIS. So you can see the way this works. It's pretty simple in terms of setup. We've got a basic satellite layer in the background. We've got a terrain layer to add a bit of depth, and we give it a bit of colour as a nod to Strava. This was my original layer which I'd already prepared. That was just for information. The Strava route 100 meters layer, that's one where we took the Strava GPX and then we converted it to a shapefile and then we split it into 100 meter sections. So depending on how long your line is, you have to just do a little bit of a calculation as to how many sections you want and what number you use to split it up. 100 meters works well here because my route was only 10 miles. And then if I double click this, we can see that we had 2 symbols for that line. One was presented as a dot basically, and one was a line. And then there's the 2 rules. And you'll see more of this information in the video information section, but hopefully you'll find that useful and you'll be able to create your own animations from your own Strava data.